Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Ukhonan Salim Landu. Thank you very much for joining us. Before we start, I'd like to do a few disclaimers. One is that life will life. I am personally kind of reporting from you while en route driving to a funeral. So I've stopped in a town to do this because I said I would. So there might be some background ambience noise, but I'm fully here with you. But also the second one is a quick shout out to the team who brought us here today. Yusra Bardeen, who's the curator of this festival, Ishmael Mohammed, the director of the Center for Creative Arts at UKZN, under which Artfluence is hosted, Sipindile Hlongwa, the co-curator and project manager of Artfluence, Marilyn Tsele, the Artfluence publicist. Thank you for putting together such a well thought out and intentional program. What brought us here is this provocation that reads, I'm going to read it directly. It says, Black people are predominantly depicted as poor on South African stages. A play involving Black people in South Africa is hardly complete without a gray prison blanket, piece of corrugated iron, colored people are gangsters or poor farming communities. The voice in which the actors perform is cleansed. If art reflects life, it must do so without a colonized lens. What are the challenges to true representation of marginalized voices? Now, I'm not here to do much speaking more than I am to kind of act as somebody who brings the conversations together that these amazing panelists that have been put together here will bring, right? So first up, we have Denise Newman. Denise Newman has been a professional actor for over 40 years. She personally welcomed me into this industry many moons ago too. She started out at the Space Theatre in 1979, which gave her an opportunity to create complex characters that resonate with truth and honesty. This experience included working with some of the country's greatest writers, directors, including Arthur Fugard, Peter Dirk Ace, Barney Simon, and later Lara Foote, Lara Bai, Jay Pather, Basil Apolis, and many, many more. Denise trained under Alexander van Romont, an exponent of method acting in the 1980s. She was cast in her first lead film role, City Lovers, adapted for film from a short story by Nadine Godema, which deals with the subject of love across the color line in apartheid South Africa. Over the years, she has moved between theater, film, and television effortlessly, as well as teaching and developing young actors in South Africa. Welcome, Denise. We also have Sylvia Vollenhoven, writer, award-winning journalist, playwright, and filmmaker, appointed the University of Johannesburg's first ever professor of practice, founder of Vision in Africa, that has spearheaded innovative international media training initiatives that specializes in filmmaking, creative writing, cross-platform storytelling, and training. In the 90s, Vollenhoven was the Southern African correspondent for the Swedish newspaper Expressen and was awarded Sweden's top journalism prize by Scandinavia's prestigious publicist Klubben. For 10 years, Vollenhoven served as the Southern Africa coordinator for the International Public Television Input Organization. Welcome, Sylvia. Then we have Tammy Mbongo, who is a South African actor, drama facilitator, writer, director, and arts activist. Tammy went on to study theater studies and cultural studies at CAP, and then went to UCT drama department, where he graduated. In between 2010 and 2017, he became the artistic director of Zabalaza at the Baxter Theatre, where he developed a program that continues to provide platform for upcoming artists throughout the Western Cape. Tammy Mbongo has worked very close with the Department of Cultural Affairs and Sport in the drama outreach program as creative manager. Tammy was appointed by the Minister of Arts and Culture, Nathi Mthethwa, to serve in the Dance Theatre Advisory Task Team with the purpose to develop a framework for the two sectors. In 2016, he was awarded by the Department of Cultural Affairs and Sports for the best contribution in the Western Cape for drama. This is the same year that Zabalaza was awarded for the Florida Cup Innovation Award. And last, and by no means least, we have Lireko Mfuno, who is a multifaceted writer, theatre maker, and project lead for Heartline's Fathers Matter project. Lireko honed his craft at the National School of the Arts and later studied applied drama at West University Drama for Life in Johannesburg, South Africa. Lireko has participated in various national and international writing projects. He was a top 3 finalist in the Imbeo Scribe National Script Writing Competition in 2013 with his play Malibone, and internationally was selected into the Acitage Inspiring a Generation program that led him to travel to France, Paris in 2013 to develop self-penned Standard Bank Ovation Award-winning play Narrative Dreams, which went on a national tour and was nominated for an Aledi Award. So on that note, I'm gonna give a few minutes to each of these amazing panelists to just kind of take us through what this provocation kind of inspired their thoughts to go towards. I will first call up Lireko. Lireko, you have the floor.
Thanks, Ukona, and thanks to the festival for inviting me, and greetings to everyone watching. Greetings to my fellow panelists. So I don't want to lie, I had a bit of a meltdown when we sort of got the context and the topic as it is, because I'm a playwright, you know, and I was like, I kind of feel like this needs to be engaged with artistic directors, because I'm not in charge of what goes on South African stages. I'm a writer, you know, I sit in my bedroom, I sit in my room and I write plays and I dream all day to get my work staged. I wish that I could have that decision. I could decide what goes on South African stages, but owners of theater houses, artistic directors, they tend to determine what they feel needs to happen this year, what we need to stage. So it was that bit of a meltdown. The writer in me was going, you know, maybe you need to be an artistic director one day, and start determining that. So that was a bit of a meltdown. And then after further engagement, I looked at sort of what was meant with apartheid and colonial narratives, because I was interested in what is meant by that, what was being trying to be defined. Because for me, I look at the protest theater that came out of the 1970s and 1980s. I look at sort of the theater of resistance that gave marginalized voices an opportunity to use art as a weapon of that time. And I wondered, is this what is meant by apartheid and colonial narratives? And if that's the case, then I as young as I am, I appreciate those works. You know, I think we need to remember, when we are critical, as often as we are, when we're critical of the restaging of some of these historical works, I think we need to be careful, and we need to remember to note that some of these plays that came from apartheid, some of them gave birth to our democracy and gave birth to freedom of speech, etc. It's important for our history, I think, to find a time and occasion to have a voice even in our present form, because history teaches us in many ways how to navigate around decisions, how to treat each other. And also, there's a wealth of work that came out of that time. I mean, in university, I went to an art school. I started studying dramatic art from the age of 12 years. And the works that I was exposed to, Fugard and Fatima Dike and Ngema, some of those works have been quite difficult in terms of the quality of them to match. Those were seminal works. Those were brilliant pieces of South African text that provided the foundation for writers like me of today to be able to have a voice. So that I was wondering, is this what we call colonial narratives? And so that's something I hope some of the panelists will engage with. What do we mean by that? I think the problem is not those works, the historical works that we keep seeing on South African stages, many of which play into our topic of today, which is many of them portray Black people as poor, poverty-stricken, and victims. I think for me that's not the problem, because they have they have an opportunity. There's a gap for them to fill in modern time. I think the issue is then for me the lack of balance that we see on South African stages. So for instance, how many young voices are given platforms today to capture the times that we're living in? How many of them, how many programs are there designed to develop young writers in this country? I know I'm a product. Acid did a lot of developmental work in my life, and that's how I found my voice. But I know I'm one of 10 who wouldn't have had that opportunity to develop my writing. And as well as our stages, I think stages need to do three things. I think firstly, they need to represent where we come from. I think our South African stages, secondly, need to represent where we are. And then thirdly, and much more importantly, South African stages need to represent where we desire to be as a society. And I think the third one is where the young writers and young voices need to be present in and need to get into that domain. And I don't know if South African artistic directors see it in that lens, that we need to appreciate the past, the present, but we need to have a voice and opportunity in the present form to allow voices to create a new South Africa, which is how protest theater was created. We had writers who were dissatisfied and theater makers who were dissatisfied with where South Africa was, and they were dreaming forth for a new South Africa. And so South Africa is dissatisfied with where we are, and the artists, we're looking at the artists to say, can you dream for us? Can you show us where to go? And I don't think South African stages are that inclined. It's a bit of a disappointment, but I'm also speaking not only on my behalf, but on many young theater makers who are frustrated currently in the country and are finding other avenues to explore because we just don't find a voice currently. Third point, and I'm about to conclude, maybe last 2 minutes, is why do we have theater that still depicts South Africans as poor? Because that's a question that we have, and I think we have that because there's a leap of faith that established theaters are not willing to make by disabling young people to have a voice today. We have great historical archives that were there because, and in many ways, it's that militancy argument in that some of these spaces are no market theater. You had to be quite bold and quite militant in order to be able to have a John Carney and Fugard creating work together in Winston Chona. There's a sort of militancy that they had to be, and I know they were not so young, but they were young as well, that they needed to have in order to possess these stages. And I wonder as well if there's a pulse within young artists in South Africa, if we do have that urgency and that agency to take up those positions and to knock on those doors and to say, listen, I've got 3 works that I've been developing, and it's about a South Africa that we're dreaming of. And I'm wondering if there's space for us to explore. I wonder if we are desperate enough to possess that gap. And I don't know if we are, because I'm not seeing that scale shift. My last point is, and that is to us as Black people, because many a times this argument, we have it the other way around. So we as Black people look towards the white community and we say, this is how you guys see us, and we are dissatisfied with that. But I don't think we see ourselves enough outside of the white community or outside of the white gaze. I think we haven't yet, and this is me as a young Black South African who grew up in the 90s. I don't know if we've got to a place as Black people where we see ourselves as empowered. And what I mean by that is we have a new democracy, and of course it came with its wounds, and it came with it's not, the foundation are not strong, but it came. And as a young South African, I'm expecting myself and my generation to truly believe that Biko, when he dreamed of a South Africa one day where there will be young voices and young Black voices, who will create out of the freedom that has been given to them, they will be able to possess that and do it truthfully out of the freedom that we've been given. I still think we see ourselves the way apartheid had designed ourselves to see ourselves. In other words, I think Black consciousness has not yet etched itself in us. And as a result, you still find ourselves when we're creating work around our victimhood, and we're creating work out of our lack, and we're creating work out of our scars, and we're creating work out of our wounds, and not enough creating work out of the freedom that was given to us. And so some of my work explores that. I was born in 1992, and so I remember at the age of 10, I remember seeing Mark Shuttleworth go to space, and I remember what that did to me as a dreamer, as a young Black boy dreaming. And I'm hoping that we would be able to create works not outside of the racial sort of discussions that are important, but to have work that really celebrates the freedom that we now possess, and work that allows us to dream forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lireko, for that. Sylvia, I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Ukona. Well, I'd like to pick up from where Lireko left off on that very important aspect of dreaming, of envisioning a different future, because I think that's vitally important. And when I looked at the framing of this discussion, the provocation, I found there was a part of me that found it really problematic, because I felt that artists were being challenged, and on the other hand, I thought that yes, I'd like to rise to the challenge because of the kind of plays that I've been writing, mostly in collaboration with director and actor Basil Apollos. Goes to the heart of what we're talking about here. And we're talking about questions of depiction and representation of Black people. And I find it so ironic that decades after the birth of the South African democracy, we're still talking about Black people being marginalized and represented in a certain way. And I don't think that it is entirely fair to lay the blame at the door of the theatre makers, at the door of the playwrights, at the door of the artists, which is sort of a little bit about, what Lireko was saying. And while I agree with him in some points, I also feel that theatre managements and creative directors have to be confronted. They have to be engaged with a different kind of artistry. But we're talking about wealth and poverty, and those are not issues that we can solve by representing and depicting South Africans differently in the theatre or on stage. Those are issues that we have to solve with a kind of new protest theatre, a new agitprop. When we talk about protest theatre, the kind of works that Lireko was referring to, we talk as if it's in the past and as if it's part of our history, and we've now moved beyond that. There's no more need or reason to protest any further. In the meantime, when we look at this country, it is one of the most unequal societies in the entire world, on the planet. That is no mean achievement. And so for me, it is not about challenging the artists to depict South Africans differently, or yes, maybe to have a better balance, but I think it's about challenging the artists to attack the systems that have landed us in a situation of nothing more than glorified modern feudalism, quite honestly. If I look at the plight of the working class people in South Africa and the unemployed and the poverty-stricken, those people, the levels of poverty are not entirely necessary. And for us, it is not a simple thing about writers and playwrights and theatre makers depicting the country differently. It is a much more complex problem, because if it was a simple thing of depiction and representation, then to depart a little bit from the theatre stage, then that Netflix series, Young, Famous and African, would be the answer. And if it is the answer, then I can only but weep for Africa, because Young, Famous and African is gross. There's no story, there's no artistry, there is no depth to it. It is just superficial fluff of people who are reveling in endless materialism and conspicuous consumption. So if that is what we are aspiring to when we redress the imbalance, when we get away from the prison blankets and the shacks and the whatever, then I really give up. But I think what I see as the challenge personally, as a writer, as a playwright, as a storyteller, is that I need to make art that challenges a 21st century status quo that accepts that most people are poor and that a handful of people, not just in South Africa, but in the entire world, are disgustingly, nauseatingly rich, and that there's nothing we can do about that. I think those assumptions should be challenged. And so for me, it moves beyond a question, way beyond a question of representation and depiction. It moves into the arena of artists dreaming, envisioning a different future without this gross imbalance that we have in the world at the moment. And what does that look like?
Thank you, Sylvia, for all of that. Tammy, could you share your initial thoughts, please?
Thank you very much, Sis O'Connor. Firstly, thanks to the institution for creating these important debates. And I think they are very necessary, you know, to have this debate. I think as you read in the provocation, it says that Black people are predominantly depicted as poor on South African stages. I think we don't need to beat about the bushes. The truth is, Black people, mostly in South Africa, are still poor today, regardless of whether Black government is in power, but most Black people are still poor in South Africa. The status quo has not changed. You understand? And I think we have what we call, and I'll come later and speak about it in the theater context, we have what we call BEE, which is the Black Economic Empowerment, which was a policy that the government created. And later on, they changed it into, what is it called? Broad-based Black Economic Empowerment, I think in 2003. And then later on, last year, if I'm not mistaken, when Cyril Ramaphosa announced that the BEE strategy and legislation will be reviewed, we understand, because they realize there's a lot of corruption that is involved in that. We understand. So the starting point for me, O'Connor, it will be Blacks in power, even in our theaters today. We understand the first question we should ask, are they doing justice to change what we are talking about? We understand. And I don't want to mix everyone into one jar. You know, we've got state-funded theaters who should lead by example. You understand? Because we're talking about state money. You understand? And then you've got independent theater spaces, and then you've got alternative theater spaces. Yeah, for me, as Tamimbong, the starting point will be on state-funded institution. They need to reflect on where we are as a country. We understand, based into where are we positioning the voice of Blacks. You understand? If an artistic director programs production that still speaks in apartheid term, you understand, there's nothing, as Ulerek was saying, as writers, directors, there's nothing that you can do. We lead by example, you understand? And I think in this country, there's a need to revisit even the Cultural Institution Act that govern these state-funded institutions, because we can't be talking now in our era about what needed to be done. We know there were a lot of compromises that were made in this democracy. And remember, in South Africa, people were fighting for freedom, not for democracy, which are two completely, totally different things. You understand? We ended up getting democracy, not freedom. You understand? Which was a compromise. So in a lot of these institutions, you've got now the new phase of apartheid is like the Blacks in power, but they are still driven with that mentality of apartheid. You know, as Lokshin, we always say is when you are in a position of power, because you know how much you've struggled in the past, and now it's your turn to be in power. That mentality is still there, even in our artistic directors and CEO. Management of this institution are still stuck in that apartheid mentality. And that one, we need not to beat about the bushes. We need to be honest. And one of the problem, I think Lereko was mentioning about artistic directors. For me, to be honest, in South Africa, most of our artistic directors, especially in the state-funded institution, their mentality are still like resident directors. I don't know if they know what's the difference between being an artistic director and a resident director. You have artistic directors who direct most of the production a year. You understand? And they are not allowing these new voices that will give new perspective of what is happening out there. It's about them. It's about honoring the people that they love, the people that they admire. So they are not allowing new voices. And we're talking about state-funded institution. We understand that because it's about them. We are still having what I call, I don't want to be political, but it's ANC mentality, because it's been ANC that has been in government since 1994. And it's about the politics of the stomach. You know, when you become artistic director or CEO in this institution, it's about your cabal. It's about protecting people that are working closer. It's about making sure that everyone closer to you eats. And they don't care about what kind of stories that they are telling. You know, when I went to study, I went to study at UCT, and I graduated, I think, 2001. One of the complaints that I was always making, because the system that we were taught at UCT, it was as if we were sorted when we go back to the township. Yeah, you understand? But the curriculum was not preparing us to survive when we go back to the township. They were teaching us about Stanislavski, about Shakespeare, about all those things. But when you go back to the township and there's no resources to do that art, it becomes useless. And then you end up graduating. Hence, you have so many blacks in this country who graduated from this institution who are not working, while the white students who went to the same institution are in a better position. You understand? Because the whole system is rotten. You understand? When we talk about colonizing, we need to decolonize everything. Sis Ukona, we are about to say this system of teaching, you know, when you meet, I'm glad, like about Sis Denise, who I admire in the industry, I hear when you go into the industry, you are told about what is written with all these theater practitioners, Stanislavski, Shakespeare, and that. And when you speak English properly, Sis O'Connor, you are regarded as a smart actor. And there's a difference between drama and grammar. You understand? We've got actors who are not good in speaking English, but the measure in this, on our stages, is based on how well you can project yourself. If you speak English well, they're like, wow, Ukona is so like, you know, but when you speak English, not in a right way, as if English is a measure to see who is successful, who is not, and it's wrong. You understand? It needs to be changed. When you go to our stages, the stories that they tell, they will rather revisit the stories that were classic in the old days. We've got classic right now that we're not talking. The classic, if like my influence is coming from Barney Simon, I will revisit all the plays from Barney Simon, or if my influence is from Shakespeare, you understand? But we're not going deeper. And I think independent theater and the alternative spaces are trying their best, but we're not seeing it. We understand that because we're looking at the mainstream. And same applies because in the film industry, it's same thing. We understand it because they tell stories, or a channel or a production company will decide to go to now, this one speaks to our target audience. They don't care if it speaks to Black people or changing the perspective. You watch the same films, you understand, portraying our people the same, but the producer is not thinking about the stigma of the film. He's thinking how much money I'll make on this production if I'm telling this particular story. So no one cares. And then artists and directors and writers are forced to work on this production. Lastly, I would say there's what I call new voices and old voices. New voices, because I was in trouble once for saying this, you understand? Because I feel there are people in the industry that feels good, they know everything in the industry. I respect the experience of doing things. We understand from the older people. In isiXhosa, there's a saying that inyathi ibuzo kwabaphambili. We understand that those who've got experience, they've got knowledge. Sometimes you might have experience and not know the how. We understand. So when you allow new generation to come with new voices, new approaches of these things, things will change. If we are having artistic director who are coming with new voices, and I'm sure the portrayal of Black people will change. But now you are stuck with artistic directors and the people on board who have experienced apartheid, and they've got only one way of saying yes, madam, no, madam. So there's a need to decolonize theater in general if we want to see changes in how Black people are being portrayed on our stages. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tammy. Last but certainly not least, Dennis, do give us your initial thoughts, please.
Hello. Ooh, it's always bad to go last because everyone's used up so many of the wonderful information and stories. But let me start at my beginning. I worked at the Space Theatre, which happened to be a theatre where the management decided there were going to be no segregated audiences, there were going to be no segregated performers on stage. They were going to try and have a normal theatre in an abnormal society. And we're talking about the 70s. So it was really groundbreaking. And everybody who came there understood that we are with people who don't buy into the apartheid system. They are there because they have something to say theatrically, and that they are going to be, they're going to say, do it unashamedly. And for me, that was the most fascinating thing, that growing up through apartheid, that I realized there is a theatre that I felt at home in, where I could hone my craft. And we're talking about Athol Fugard, Brian Asprey, Yvonne Bryceland, Bill Flynn, Bill Curry, Ace, hundreds and thousands of people, including me, started out at the Space Theatre. And we did classic plays and we did the protest theatre on as well. So it had, you didn't just do the theatre that spoke about the state. We also did the classics. People are living, well, that's now a classic, but I'm talking about plays that have been established as European classics. And for me, it was one of those things that said, the reason we were all speaking the same language is because we were all there for the same, at the same time, wanting to make theatre irrespective of what the government was saying. And it was a simple thing. They constituted the space as a club. So you came in, you signed up, and there were no cell phones or things in those days. So you got to know what was happening next week when you came this week to the theatre. And the police could do nothing because they constituted themselves as a club. And you knew the night when the security police were sitting in the audience because you could see them suited, and you waited for the next day whether the play was going to be banned or whether it was going to be allowed to continue. So that was my experience of theatre. And as we all know, the plays that came out of that era and the sister theatre in Johannesburg, the Market Theatre, they were groundbreaking. What we talk about today is that managements, and I agree with everybody, managements haven't changed. We never sat down to all be on the same page theatrically. We all were living in our little bubbles, and that was where we are. And it is weird, it is awful that we are decades into our democracy still talking about something that we should have sorted out the day we said, now how do we go forward from here? And it's wonderful that there are some initiatives, but it all boils down to money. And managements and direct, have the money, and those are the people who make the decisions about which play to do and which play not to do. And there's been crossovers, and there was a play from the 70s and the 80s called Scenery in the Suburbs that a few years ago they did with an all brown cast. And I thought, yes, let me go and see this play. And I was absolutely disgusted because the director and all the players played absolutely into the stereotype, and it really, really upset me. So there I felt, first of all, as a performer, I will never go and do a play where I have to play a stereotype. Yes, there are those type of people. There are poor people there, but they have a whole history. They have a reason for their existence. It's not just to represent poverty. So for that particular play, Scenery in the Suburbs, I was so angry at all the actors and the director for actually choosing the stereotype. And we as performers, we can change those narratives if we really want to, if we feel strongly enough about changing the narrative. It doesn't mean we don't have to do the play. It just means we have to reinterpret it. For me, the big thing about the state of theatre at the moment, and yes, we've come through COVID, it's been a horrible 2 years, but theatre is starting to revive. And then I see a play where they put a lot of money into it. And it again depicts from one person's perspective, the director's perspective, it depicts what their vision of poverty and Black people is. And I'm talking about Michael Kay. So we must fight with the producers and directors to reinterpret how we tell stories. And yes, we aren't all the gangsters and the people who are fishermen and work on the farms. We also have lives, and Sylvia and Basil have done wonderful change in the narrative. I mean, the Roads Must Fall movement also changed the dynamic of what was happening, and out of that came a whole new theatre movement. And you talk about Mandla Mbotwe and the Magnet Theatre. You talk about Aubrey Segabe and the State Theatre, who sometimes does things, James Mkhobo in the Market Theatre. Sometimes there are productions, but what we need to do is we need to step forward and move forward in this and reclaim it. And it does have to do with who holds the money. And unfortunately, it's still sitting in the same place that it always has been. And that needs to change. We haven't had the discussion about what we would like to see in theatre going forward. And we don't only have to go to the theatres, the established theatres. We should re-frequent the township theatres, the theatres that are, some of them are really well equipped. We should go in and sit with people who we are representing, people we need to get to know. And I think that is where what happens is that they've put us in small boxes, and you Xhosa or you Sotho or you Zulu or you Amakalad. I hate that term. We riled against it because they de-Africanized us by calling us colored mixed race. I am proudly Griqua. That is where my ancestry come from, with all of the mixture. But what we need to do is we need to have the discussions. We can't keep talking about them and us and those people and our people, and because we have to share, we have to come together as South Africans. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for such thought-provoking introductions. I think in the interest of time, because we have 20 minutes left, I'm going to throw a few questions to you, and then, you know, you can jump in and take whatever question you feel compelled to answer, so that we have a little bit of room to just see if there are any questions from the audience. Quickly, what I'm kind of hearing all of you say and kind of resonate with each other is the idea that, you know, the stories and the depictions that we see of ourselves on stage or any other art form can be of a reflective nature of our past. They can be of a kind of you know, showing us our current state, and they can be of a nature where they are imagining a future, right? So we agree on that there's room for all of these kind of depictions, and that they form part of our meaning making, right? And so my first question is that, so then who then gets to tell these stories? So in the case of telling the stories of our nuanced existence, which is something that we've also established, that it's not a let's not tell our stories of our struggles and the poverty that is still quite prevalent. Who gets creative license to monetize, commodify our stories, right? And then the second thing that I wanna throw in there is a little bit to what Denise kind of mentioned towards the end there, around if imagination is political, and the act of imagining yourself into existence is political, what are the conversations that we need to have around the resources that make it possible for people's imaginations to fully be explored, right? The third and final question is the responsibilities that spaces that position themselves as alternative voices that make space for these stories. Some of these platforms even go as far as going into maybe the townships to mine out stories. And to what extent do they have a responsibility to do a little bit more than just kind of mining on a superficial level? What is the other moral responsibility to make sure that there is an education around the social, political issues that determine where people's imagination lands them when they do create space? I'm talking about spaces like Magnet Theatre, spaces like Zabalaza Theatre, who go into the townships and they emerge with these stories. And they're often themes that you will see. And some of these themes are literally just like, you feel like perhaps a little bit more work should have been done around the context, and a little bit more care should have been taken when you crack open people's wounds in that way and you put them in position where they are performing their pain. So I want to throw those three things, and any of you can respond anyhow. I feel like Denise is burning. I'll go to you, and then maybe I will see who else. Can I get, just so that we have an order, who else wants to go after Denise? Sylvia wants to go after Denise, then Lireko. I don't see Tammy, but we'll give him a chance. So Denise, Sylvia, Lireko, and then you, Tammy.
I just want to jump in with your first question. Who should be telling our stories? You know, I don't for a moment think that only I can tell our stories, because I think that everybody, it's a human story. It's not a particular box story. We should all be able to do, but the director or the producer has to listen. And I will bring up as the film Kretoa, as made by Roberta Durant a few years ago, which really depicted Kretoa in a really terrible light, that she was in love with her rapist. But Sylvia and Basil did a theatre version of the Kretoa story, which was much truer to the actual story. And the producer, Roberta Durant, took her sort of theatrical license and created a story that made very many people angry. So what I'm saying is, But by the same token, I've done stories written by white, but then they got Black people to direct it, so it had a more authentic voice. So it doesn't matter who does it, but the person directing or the person producing has to listen and take on board what the people who are proposing the story says. Yeah, that's what I want to comment on.
I want to take it further, because this issue of representation and cultural appropriation is really, really serious. I am tired of white South Africans who want to tell my story. I think that they have an entire history where they told the South African story, made a mess of it, and now it is up to us to in retrospect, clean up the mess that they've left us and tell the story from another perspective. And so, yes, it is okay for anybody to tell any story, but it just makes sheer logical sense that I am better placed to tell my own story than a white person from a different kind of background. And I like the way Denise glossed over the life and times of Michael K. So I'm just going to go there. I come from a rural background, and my family, mostly people from farming districts. And when I read that book by J.M. Coetzee, The Life and Times of Michael K., supposedly the experiences of a poor Black rural person, and I watch the production at the Baxter, I don't see myself or my people represented at all. What I do see is a white man's almost perverse imagining of what our lives have been like. And then that brings me to the issue of poverty. When, Basil Apollos talks about the poverty of the mind, there's no coincidence that the predictions in the beginning of COVID just devastating Africa and South Africa specifically didn't happen, because we don't have that poverty of the mind. We shouldn't confuse the lack of material possessions with poverty. There's a richness in our community that has to be acknowledged. There's a richness that Black South Africans can bring to their stories that have to be acknowledged, that has got nothing to do with material wealth. And so when we're talking about depiction and depictions of Black people as poor, we're talking about issues beyond materialism. We're talking about depiction of Black people as having no power, having no agency, and that is simply not true. In the midst of material struggles, we have tremendous power, and that cannot come through in a story written by some bourgeois white person or even a bourgeois Black person, because they simply have not had that experience and they don't have the depth. And so when we redress these issues, when we solve the problems that we are discussing here today, it is not simply about writing stories about rich people or the middle classes, because the middle classes can be damn boring, as we all know, and their stories lack the compunction and compelling nature and the engaging nature that stories from more robust working class backgrounds have. And let's face it, for most of us in South Africa, this thing of being rich or being middle class is relatively new. Most of us come from really working class backgrounds, or so our parents and our grandparents definitely do. So it is not just shifting the focus from these people in this particular neighborhood to Bishop's Court or Sandton or whatever. That is not what we're doing here. What we are saying, I think, or what I'm saying very clearly, is that certain people should take a backseat and allow us to tell our stories, and that theatre managements and the enablers and the gatekeepers and artistic directors should wake up and realize that in some cases their time has come and gone, and that the newer voices, and that's why Zabalaza is such an exciting venture, that the newer voices should take center stage.
Go ahead, Lurako.
All right, I see we don't have time left. It's been so good to just hear the different perspectives. So I guess it's, I don't think we should, even when we get into sort of the context of, some of these festivals, Kwana, that you were mentioning, and sometimes you do a festival in Kokas, in the location, and some of the work that we see is quite violent. And sometimes theater is a thermometer for where we are, and sometimes it's good to be able to see that and say, back to Tammy's point, that, you know, if we are in a broken society and even from a governmental level, there hasn't been much progress in terms of economic power. We shouldn't expect to see anything less. We shouldn't expect from theater what we're not expecting from the government or from these institutions that are around us. And if theater is reflecting our current brokenness, then we need to take it in and understand it. And so we shouldn't pacify them. We shouldn't sanitize young people's voices, even if they show the violence that we are as a country. Rather, let's encourage all the other voices to come into play. Denise and Sylvia have spoken really about the lack of conversation that has happened into a new South Africa. And I think that's perhaps, if there's any hope, that's the way forward. You know, we need the old guard and the new guard to carve a new South Africa. It can't just be new voices, because the gatekeepers are the old guard, really. And so we need them to open up and say, guys, come in and let's talk about a new South Africa. But theater, in as much as we run away from this, it will always mirror where society is. And if we want to see where South Africa is, we need to look at theater. And so if we see some of these big institutions recycling some of these stories, or if we see them misinterpreting specific cultures, then it still says those beliefs are still intact and we need to do something about them.
Go ahead, Tammy. Thanks, Lyrical.
I'll be quick. Who gets to tell these stories? I think storytellers, they need to tell the story regardless of their background, but they need to tell it with respect and care. Yeah, you understand? Like if you look at on what has been happening on our stages, let me be a little bit controversial, if you call it. Why have we not seen Jewish stories of Holocaust on our stages? Why haven't we seen how Muslim, when they die, what is the procedure? Yet it's fine to watch a story that is told about Xhosa initiation and all those stuff. So it tells us something about those people who are programming that. And then when you talk about the responsibility of alternative spaces, and you've made an example about Zabalaza and Magnet Theatre, you know, luckily I was the artistic director of Zabalaza for 7 years. You know, I'll always say this thing about alternative spaces. Magnet should not be a mini of University of Cape Town. Zabalaza should not be a mini of Baxter Theatre Centre. You understand? Alternative spaces are there to offer what you would never get in these mainstream spaces. The moment the management who runs the Baxter Theatre interferes on the work that you see in Zabalaza, then it's no longer Zabalaza, it's no longer alternative space. It's the mini space of that theatre. You understand? So alternative spaces should be a space where people are exploring new things and new ideas. And I don't think in South Africa, in these alternative spaces, we understand that are attached to institution, we have achieved that. But there are alternative spaces who are doing that. And as Sylvia was saying, it all depends on the funding. Because when the DAC is funding you, they tell you what to do. And you understand, you can't speak bad about the government because they will make sure no one will fund you ever again. So we don't have actually real alternative spaces on our stages in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just need to be alerted to how we are doing on time. I think we are on the final 4 minutes, and maybe to just read some comments that I've been seeing kind of pop up on the side here. I won't read the yes fire ones because I think, you know. So there's the statement in the provocation that talks about the voice they perform in is cleansed. Maybe as a closing kind of thing, I'd love for you to spend 1 minute concluding on what you understand by that statement of a voice being cleansed in your particular kind of positionality. what qualifies as a cleansed voice, and then to maybe just spend the other minute just concluding and saying the last thing you'd like to say on the matter. And you can go in any, whoever's ready can go.
I think in the old-fashioned sense, that idea of cleansed voices is something we inherited from the colonials, where you spoke English in a certain way, you spoke Zulu in a certain way. It just meant that it allowed us to make very quick judgments about who was educated and who was not educated. I don't think that's an issue any longer with younger people, performers, actors in South Africa, especially when we look at television, and especially when I look at some of the works on our stages. So I'm quite happy that accent on a certain kind of standard speech and a certain, no matter which language it is going. You know, there's even at the University of the Western Cape, they're even working on a dictionary called Afrikaans. So there's a movement away from standard speech. There's a movement away from English being seen in a certain light, and that is great. But I think the movement can be a lot more vigorous.
Thank you, Sylvia. Dennis, it looks like you're ready.
Yes, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think there is a movement away. And what I did want to say is that Milan Kundera said, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. So we must never forget where we come from. We carry it with us every day. And yet, what we also must remember is that we are a hybrid race. We are part of the human race. We're all South Africans. So, you know, if we only tell stories from one perspective, I will fight strongly to tell that story. But I also think that I am born for the classics. For example, I'm a Shakespeare girl, and we didn't even touch on Shakespeare, whether Shakespeare should be allowed in school or not, how relevant or irrelevant is it in this day and age. But I mean, that's not what I'm saying. We cannot narrow our vision so small that we only live in our little lane. We must open, and we must take the blinkers off and be inclusive of each and every South African, so that we can take hands and move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Lyrical, you sound like you're ready.
I think it's as I've been writing for a little over 10 years now, and I've been trying to investigate where do words come from, and where do characters come from, and these worlds that we carve and to present to audiences. And I think the nearest I've come to it is whatever is inside of you will come out. And it's so important for us to investigate our biases and investigate where our characters fail us, and to be able to bridge and bring people closer in our lives who will be able to speak truth to us. Because it's going to be hard for me to try to change the structures that be, but it's easier for me to try and change myself. And so if I have a white friend and he's a theater maker, and I see that he comes from a specific cloth of theater makers who marginalized us, it's important for me and him to bridge our distance and to come closer, so that I can tell him the truth, and he can do the same, so that as we carve stronger voices for our future, we are taking care of each other, because we're not going to extinguish each other. We need each other. So I think we need to bridge those distances, even amongst artistic directors and playwrights. I wish they were part of this panel, so that we can tell them and we can say, listen, you know, you're talented and you're gifted. However, there are certain things that would be good for you to look at. So that will be my contribution. Thank you.
Okay, we're 2 minutes over time, so that gives you 1 minute before inconveniencing an entire program, Tammy, and maybe, yeah.
Cleansing voices. I think we need to think about decolonizing. I like the roads must fall movement. You know, when you are in old buildings, because we are still stuck in those old apartheid buildings in our state-funded theaters, maybe they also make them to think apartheid. You understand? We need to change. We are supposed to be having new alternative spaces. And I think the artistic directors throughout, whether theaters, state-funded or what, they must think, they must not only think about feeding their own ego, but speak Yavsana for what is good for the country, because they are too much on themselves. And then closing remarks, thank you very much to the institution for this platform, because you will never get such platform in a state-funded institution, because they are scared to raise about this thing. And I think the institution has been bringing us this uncomfortable situation. I always say we are allowed to agree to disagree as long as we respect each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And it's been really amazing to hear perspectives from an intergenerational, different positionality perspective. Of course, not nearly enough time to have covered the kinds of places that we could have taken this discussion, but we did what we could, and hopefully, you know, these conversations begin to drop, to become a drop in an ocean of a greater ripple of other conversations that whose time has come. So it's a thanks from my side. Yeah.
Think moments and memories. Make magic and movies. Share between sons and daughters, or just friends in their quarter. More music, more movement, more space for amusement, where history was made and the future is paved. Adventure awaits. Together, embraced. Just down the highway. Think Midlands, my way.